All right. Kids, I hear you. I can't see all of you, but I can hear you. And so I'm just wondering if you've ever been on a team before. So if you have been on any sort of team before, sports, robotics, the debate team, if that's what it's called, whatever it is, I just want you to raise your hand. You've been on a team? Raise your hand. Okay? A couple of you. All right. Somebody tell me what kind of team you've been on. Let's hear it. Baseball, soccer, volleyball. Okay? What else? Huh? Soccer. Okay? We need more baseball players in this church. Y'all need to register at Martinsburg Little League. All right. We got some baseball players, right? Jackson, what about you? Bible team. Whew, the holy section over here, y'all. Okay, I see you, Jax. That's my nephew. I love him. I'm proud of him. I remember the first time I had to try out for a team. Any of y'all been at tryouts before? Or is it just the kind of team where everybody's welcomed on? Like, yeah, those are the kind of sad ones. Anyways, weeks of conditioning, training, like you know the drill. You show up at times you're not excited to show up at. And the coaches, at this point in my life, they tell the massive players that are showing up early that rosters for the teams are going to be posted on the gym door. Some of y'all made it, some of you didn't. And so the moment I started hearing that, my palms are sweating. There's murmuring among the lot, and it was contagious, and we're all wondering who's going to make the team. You made JV, junior varsity, maybe you made varsity, maybe you're going to be the one sitting in the bleachers with everybody else. And the morning dawned, and so I make my way toward my fate. I'm pretty nervous, as you can imagine. There's 2 lists posted on the door, one for junior varsity, one for varsity. I get to the door, my hands are trembling, my eyes are steady, and I begin to trace down the list of names, and I was in shock. All the hard work, all those early mornings, a big deal for a slothful high schooler, would finally prove their worth or their waste. And walking up to get my jersey from the coach felt surreal. I was finally a varsity baseball player for the almighty Bulldogs. I had just grown up across the street from P.O. Faulkner, which is where the Bulldogs play. And so my love for baseball was birthed as a young boy because I would sit in my backyard and I would watch these same dudes play a sport that I had grown to love. And now I was holding the same jersey in my hand, and I had reached the pinnacle of my life. I'd made the team. Maybe you know the feeling. It's awesome. But now I knew the work would really begin. There's no I in team, right, as the saying would go. So I was ready to show that I was taking this new role seriously. More conditioning, more practices, travels, games, like I couldn't wait. And all of these responsibilities, they would define my role as a team member. But if I was on the team and I never really did my job, what kind of team member would that really make me? And how would my lack of ownership and involvement affect the rest of my teammates? I've really grown to love this idea of teaming because it's not just about one person, but instead it's about every person working together. Now, you forget about yourself if you're a team player, and you give your best for the name that's on the front of the jersey, not the name that's on the back of the jersey. The church is very similar. And in a culture where people tend to think mostly of themselves and what they can get, the very idea that church members bear important responsibilities comes as a bit of a surprise to many Christians. But responsibility and church members go hand in hand. You simply cannot have one without the other. In fact, wherever you have a group of people that are committed to one another and a common goal, these people automatically assume a responsibility just by joining the group. And even more so, if you join a church, you've got responsibilities. It's those responsibilities that I intend to look at this morning as we open up the scriptures. The role and responsibility of church member. I cannot stress the importance of this enough because the New Testament is incredibly clear on how important the role is of every single member. I've entitled this sermon, Keyholders, because keys represent something very specific. Anybody want to take a guess? What do keys represent? Ownership, it's true. Anything else? Access, authority. And church members, according to Jesus, are supposed to be the final key holders of their local church. So that when you became a church member, if it was this church or any other, Jesus says, according to the scriptures, you automatically take on responsibility and authority. And we're going to look at that reality and a few others throughout the course of our time. But first, I want to remind you of why we're doing this in the first place. I began my just welcome by telling you that we generally preach through books of the Bible, and we've paused in the book of 1 Peter in order to consider this topic of polity. This is the last sermon in the series, but it is just as important as all of the others. This word polity is a bit strange. If you've been here for 3 weeks now, then it's a little more common for your language, but polity is how a church is organized and how it's operated. And what we find in the New Testament, which is after Jesus has come onto the scene, it's like the latter third of the Bible. What we find in the New Testament is that polity, how a church is organized and how it is managed, is an important tool in the Holy Spirit's arsenal and strategy to keep the local church faithful to the Great Commission of helping people find and follow Jesus. So as a church body, on May 21st, you already know this, we are intending as a body to vote on a polity change, meaning that if we decide that we're going to fine-tune, that we're going to function a certain way as this church family. So right now, we are, as a body, more elder-ruled with a hint of congregationalism, but the elders, of which I'm a part, are proposing that we embrace a clearly defined biblical model of being deacon-served, elder-led, and congregational. 2 Sundays ago, we looked at Acts chapter 6 and considered the office known as the diaconate, which are officially appointed servants, both men and women within the body who meet specific needs of their local church under the oversight of the elders. Now, while those serving in this role have no spiritual authority over fellow members, they do have practical responsibilities that fall under their position. It's a spiritual position that works itself out in practical ways. It's not a position of authority, it's a position of servitude. That sermon is online. Last week we looked at the office of elders. We can also find that work from 1 Peter chapter 5. Today, though, we slow down over this term congregationalism, and we look at what the Bible has to say about the role and responsibilities of the common church member, which is the majority of CAM, or the Church of Martinsburg's members. Now, by common church member, this is not a position of inferiority or lesser importance. Really, it's just one who is at the one foundational level that we are all, right? If you're a member, I'm a member, this is who we are. We are church members, but as we consider those that have no official title, maybe have no delegated office of service you're responsible for, but you serve and you give and you take real ownership of the faith family, you love the body and you want to sacrificially give yourself to the good of the people that God has entrusted to you. What is your role and responsibility? It's a question we want to ask. And so maybe you've recently come to faith and you feel compelled now to take the next step. You've heard this church membership thing. What does it mean? What are its implications? What does it mean of me? Or maybe you've been a follower of Jesus for 50 years and you've sat in pews like Pastor Terry. What does that look like? Or you're a teenage member. You still live with your parents and you know that you've got some limitations in life, but you want to fully give yourself to the body that God has used to bless you. So as we comb through a few New Testament passages, I want to share with you the responsibilities that we're going to be looking at one by one. They're on the screen. We see from the scriptures that members prioritize assembling together. They define the church's membership. We protect the gospel. We invest in the lives of fellow members. We submit to the elders, and we evangelize the lost. I'm just going to take these one by one. And so this is not the last time that you'll see this list, but I want to give it to you on the front end. So for any note takers, you want to begin thinking, you can track with me as we go. I'm going to be spending more time the first two responsibilities, prioritizing assembling together and defining the church's membership, not because they're more important, but because they are more involved in a congregational model that we are considering. So with that in mind, I would invite you to turn to Matthew chapter 16, and here we pick up Jesus doing some very specific things in a specific context, and the church is born. Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 to 18, we find the first responsibility of the church member. It's on the screen. There's also Bibles along the back wall. Feel free to check those out. Here we go. Caesarea Philippi is where they are. This is a pagan place. I've actually stepped foot here, and this is a place where pagan worship is all around. Jesus is coming, and he's wanting to know, all right, despite all of the pagan, the false god worship, who are people saying that I am? And so we pick up there, and now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? Referring to himself. And they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. And he said to them, okay, but who do you say that I am? Well, Simon Peter replied, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Now, this is really important because it's the first time that we ever find the word church used in the New Testament. It's a pretty big deal. There's a lot of discussion these days all around the world, but even in our own city about what a church is. There's a lot of confusion, quite frankly. So let's not engage in grapevine talk. Instead, I would say we should just go right to the source. And when we look at the word church, it becomes clear that the responsibility then of every member is to prioritize assembling together. The word itself points to that. It's the type of language that Jesus would use when he founded the church in Matthew 16. The word that he uses in the Greek is one that several of us have heard probably. It's ekklesia. This word was only reflected in the ancient Greek when it would have been used only when citizens would have assembled together. So I don't really like the word assembled because it feels a bit stuffy for me, but it's the best word. And I say assembled because I am not the church, just like you are not your team. Rather, the team is present when the team members are together. You don't really ask, what team are you? Maybe you are, but that's just not a good question. The better question would be, what team are you on? What team are you a part of? The local church is the assembled believers. It's not a building. It's not one person. It is a local collection of people who believe and confess that Jesus is the Son of God and that he has lived perfectly. He has died sacrificially on our behalf, and he has risen victoriously in order to reveal himself as the Messiah and to reconcile God and man. This is Peter's confession in Matthew 16. Now, on the surface, that may not be obvious, but that's what he's saying. Matthew 16:16, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. The word Christ in the Greek is the same as Messiah in the Hebrew, and it speaks to the one whom God would use to bring salvation to sinners. And so Jesus is claiming that title for himself. He's saying, I'm that guy, but we know that he's more than a guy. He's truly God and truly man, and he's the only one to have been born without a corrupt nature, and thus the only one capable of truly living perfectly by the standard of God. And he does so, and he offers up his righteousness to God as a sacrifice for us, the unrighteous. And on the cross, he takes our filth in order to extend to us his perfection. This is the good news of the gospel. And it is the belief and the confession that any local church must be established upon. This is the claim of Peter in Matthew 16. And so the very word church in English doesn't mean much to us, but when we understand its original meaning, we know that it assumes that we are not isolated, but instead we are prioritizing our time together. It means that Jesus died to save a people, and he promised that one day he will unite all of us forever. But he also intends to gather us today. A church member that doesn't gather with fellow members would be like a team member that wants to wear the jersey, but doesn't want to show up to practices or games. Just chew on that for a minute. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25 is a passage where every believer is commanded not to forsake the assembling of the church. This is language to say that we must not turn our back on the church gathering. Sundays, what the Bible calls the Lord's Day, the first day of the week, is a minimum for gathering. It's a minimum. But a recent Barna study revealed otherwise. That several self-professed Christians will say, would now consider, according to this Barna research, the average church attendee is one who participates in worship service once a month. Once a month. Now, I want you to think about the day before you get married. And before you get married, your spouse happily agrees to spend time with you once a month. I hope that would give you some real pause. That's a problem. Because if it's a month at day one, who knows what it's going to be at year 10? As we look at the responsibilities of members, it assumes physical presence. So I would just encourage you to ask yourself, if someone were to take a look at your Sunday mornings, Christian, how well would this priority be represented? How consistently do you use your Saturday night to get ready for Sunday morning? especially those of us with little kids, or all of us really. But, it's crazy with little kids. I can't imagine what my wife does every week. I get here early. I bring the boys with me, but she still's got 2 little girls that she's got to wrangle. She's not the only one in this boat. There's a lot of little kids in here, and we hear it, and we know it right now. We could even maybe smell it a little bit. I would encourage you, parents, to do everything that you can to make Sunday morning less hectic and be prepared for what in our home we call church day. Make sure the shoes are accounted for. There's nothing worse than when you walk out the door and you're like, hey, put your shoes on. I don't know where they are. Like, wow. All right, that's avoidable by getting ready on Saturday night. Saturday night, right, is how we prepare for Sunday mornings. Clothes are ready. Dads, if you want to be the spiritual leader of your home, like the Bible calls you to be, it starts with your own heart. It means that we forego the UFC late night fight, or we don't do whatever might keep us from going to bed at a decent hour. We men have to prioritize this for our families and for the church body, whether we've got kids or not. And if we're going to carry out our privileged responsibility as members, then it means that we first and foremost got to show up. It means that we prioritize assembling together. And as we show up in life and in the church body, especially during worship service on Sundays, our responsibilities then become more apparent. Just like you had to be added or removed from the team, so too are folks added and removed from the church. Thus, the second responsibility that Jesus hands to the body is to define the church's membership. Now, this one is a major point of consideration for us. Look at Matthew chapter 16 again, verses 18 and 19. And he continues on, and he says to you, I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock, the rock being the confession of Christ being the Messiah, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. This is kind of odd language for us. And so as Jesus defines what a church is, he teaches that a church is given authority from heaven to carry out a very important task, to bind and to loose. Now, binding and loosing refer to the assembled church's authority to verify on earth what has already been established in heaven. Now, this is a major point for you to consider and wrap your mind around. Binding and loosing refer to the assembled church's authority given by Jesus to verify on earth what has already been established in heaven. Now, to illustrate the point, pastor, scholar, and ecclesiologist Jonathan Lehman, he calls the local church an embassy of heaven. This is fascinating and a very helpful picture for me. An embassy, if you're not aware, it is like an official outpost of one nation that is inside the borders of another nation. It represents and it speaks for that foreign nation. Lehman recounts his own story when he says that he spent a half a year in Brussels, Belgium in college, during which time his passport evidently had expired. So then he goes to the U.S. Embassy in downtown Brussels, and he steps inside, and he is immediately on American soil. And that building, that ambassador to Belgium and all the State Department officials working inside, they bear the authority of the U.S. government. They can speak for that government in a way that just as a U.S. citizen, he cannot, at least not in any official sense. And embassies and ambassadors present the official judgment of a foreign nation, what that nation wants, what it will do, and what it believes. So then after they look at this brother's passport and check their computers, they render a judgment. He is in fact a U.S. citizen, and they give him a new passport. And when Jesus founded local churches and gave them the authority to loose and bind, he is giving them the power to declare some of heaven's judgments now. First to Peter, then to the apostles, and eventually to gathered churches. He gives local bodies similar authority to that which we've heard of in the Brussels U.S. Embassy. The authority to make judgments concerning what is right, what is a right confession of the gospel, and who is a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. I want to make it abundantly clear what this is not saying. To claim that members define the church's membership is not to say that when we gather to vote on a person's addition or removal, we are making them a Christian or removing their Christian identity from them. Rather, it is to say that Jesus has given the authority to make official pronouncements regarding the what and the who of the gospel on behalf of heaven. So, that's the teaching of the scriptures. And right now at CAM, or Church in Martinsburg, essentially the elders define the membership. Our current polity or practice, it prevents us as members from holding the keys like Jesus has given in Matthew 16. And if you know our process, then you can see the discrepancy here. So some fine-tuning is needed indeed. And so while we, the elders, are committed to leading, like we're not abdicating or forsaking leadership here, we're committed to leading as the Lord has called us, this fine-tuning will allow us to better reflect the model that Jesus established and the same one that the early church modeled in the New Testament and even beyond. And so just some practical matters. We vote on May 21st and we approve this. I just want to let you know, like, what does membership in the process then look like thereafter? Ahead of every members meeting, the list of prospects or candidates that are scheduled to be voted upon will be emailed to every member. So you'll see the names. We don't want to spring a decision on anybody. So our plan is to give you notice ahead of time about who is actually being voted upon. And if a member sees a name and they're like, man, that kind of rubs me the wrong way. I'm not sure about this guy. I wonder if they know about her reputation, whatever. Then they take those concerns to one of the elders ASAP. And the point of that is not to shame, to guilt, to condemn, or to bring judgment, but for us to be able to vet people as we should. And by the time a candidate is put before the church at a members meeting for a vote, our job as elders is to ensure that we have turned over every stone and we've looked into any concerns. And so up to this point, this person would have been in the process for a month, attending classes, at least a month, meeting with a pastor, and then that pastor sharing with the other pastors. This is a slow process for a reason. We want to give people time to know us, and we want to give us time to know them. So I want you to know, like, your pastors work very carefully to vet the who and the what of the gospel, and we will continue to do that. Now, it's not uncommon for us to pause membership for a season in order for a candidate to gain clarity in important matters. And so while we're committed to continue to zealously lead this process, and happily so, this fine-tuning will ultimately shift the final authority to the keyholders, which the Bible teaches is the gathered church members. So, what is the requirement for membership? Personality's got to jive? Is it political leanings, skill set? Like, is there any room really for bias in the membership process? These are things that the elders have been thinking on for years, and as the church receives these keys, presumably, these are the same questions that you will, as members, have to ask as well. Members will be added, or new members are added in the same way that we do now. There's specific requirements. I want to put them on the screen for you, and we're going to be talking about these a lot in the future, assuming this polity changes. But first, we would just want to see, how is a person giving evidence of regeneration? Meaning, we want to know what evidence there is in his or her life that shows a change at the heart level. Anybody can modify their behavior. We want to know, like, what's different about what's going on in your heart. Secondly, someone has to be baptized by immersion as believers in obedience to Christ. If it's a recent convert, which, to be clear, we pray this is the majority of our new members, if not all of them. We're not interested in church members shuffling around from one church to the other. We are here to help people find and follow Jesus. And we want to see the lost come to be found. And if that's the case, these folks will need to be baptized by immersion as believers. And so then what way that'll work? Members meeting, you hear their testimony, their story, we approve them pending baptism, and then we see these waters stirred the next Sunday. They must hold the doctrines of our church as expressed in our statement of faith. They must promise in writing to keep the commitments expressed in the church covenant. And they must be able to articulate the gospel with clarity. This is no new list of requirements. This is the list that the elders currently assess these 5 areas every time before we vote. And this fine-tuning is simply taking the extra step after the elders vote for the church to be the final key holder. Now, I know this is kind of in the weeds, and for some of us, we might be like, man, this is not for me. But polity matters. We've got to think deeply about these things. We've discussed matters of addition and removal at every members meeting. There's a mixture of familiarity with other passages, and one we've looked at a bunch over the years is 1 Corinthians chapter 5, where the church also has the authority to remove members under discipline and for other reasons. Information about individuals will be shared to the extent it's needed for the membership to make an informed decision. So we'll share what's true, what's helpful for processing, and what is necessary to make an informed decision. And these matters, if you look at 1 Corinthians chapter 5, 2 Corinthians chapter 2 will be handled when a member dies, abandons the church, walks away from the faith, or voluntarily moves to a like-minded church upon moving. So this is what it means, practically, for a church to define a membership. Instead of just labeling something and moving on, it's important for us to think through, what are the logistics of this? Which is why I want to slow down over that a little bit. And this is a type of membership-wide attention that will provide, honestly, a depth of care and ownership for one another's spiritual health that we're yet to experience. I mean, you think about it. When someone wants to be approved for membership and you are the one with the rest of the body voting to welcome them in, you are willingly saying, I am taking responsibility for the spiritual care of this person as a fellow member. And the depth of spiritual care for the body will change whenever we begin to receive members in this way. This polity change, it provides many blessings, but as one of your pastors, this is the one that I'm most hopeful about. If you want to read more about this, 2 recommendations. I've emailed the proposed amendments to CAM's bylaws a little over a week ago. Hopefully you've read through that if you're a member. Also, if you just want to kind of get more of an in-depth look at it, there's a book I'd recommend called Don't Fire Your Church Members. Looks like this. It is a case study on congregationalism, where it doesn't just look at historic Baptist polity, but it looks at all kinds of polity. If you want to just see it laid against other forms and models, there's an opportunity for you to do that. There's 4 more responsibilities, but I won't spend as much time on them, not because they're less important, but because they're far more familiar to us and won't be affected by our proposed polity amendment. The next responsibility of the member is simply to protect the gospel. To protect the gospel. Now, it's really clear that the New Testament teaches it is the role of your pastors to lead, to teach, and to protect. And it is not the pastor's job alone, though, to protect the gospel. Every man, every woman, every child that is a member here is responsible to uphold and affirm that which unites us. We look at a passage like Galatians chapter 1. Paul rebukes the churches in Galatia from turning to a different gospel. If you got a Bible, I'd invite you to turn there quickly. Galatians chapter 1. On the screen, verse 1 and 2 says, Paul, an apostle, not from men nor through man, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead, and all the brothers who are with me, to the what of Galatia? Just who? The churches. This is who Paul's writing to. And then in verse 6, he comes and he says, I'm astonished that you, this is a plural you, he's talking to the churches, you guys are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. Paul's teaching is clear. It is the role of the church member under the leadership of the elders to protect the gospel. This letter wasn't written to the elders, beloved. It was written to local churches of that region, the assembled congregation of God's people. Now, no doubt, somewhere the elders had played a role in this massive failure, and they would be held accountable for that. But where these things went sideways, we're not sure. But it's clear that Paul is holding the congregation accountable for allowing error to creep in and then distort the gospel they had first believed. If we are going to protect the gospel, it means that we must know it through and through. A jeweler doesn't study every possible fake diamond. The jeweler studies the real diamond, so that when something fake comes along, whether he has been exposed to it or not, he knows the real deal. Members must hold the gospel like a precious diamond. We must know it through and through, so that when something comes along in discussion with a friend, fellow member, in a community group, whatever it is, we pause and we say, brother, sister, that's not the gospel. This is what it means for us to protect that which the Lord has entrusted to us. The church members also have the privilege and responsibility to invest in the lives of fellow members. Now, I would point to the over 50 instances in the New Testament where we find these, what are called one another commands. I want to give you a couple of them. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 8. 1 Peter 4:8 says that we love one another. Romans 16:16. Romans 16:16 says that we greet one another. 1 Peter 4:9, show hospitality to one another. I didn't say Romans 16, it says greet one another with a holy kiss. Could you imagine? I don't even, we'll just greet one another. Handshake, hug, whatever. Colossians 3:13 says that we are to forgive one another. 1 John 1:7 says that we are to have fellowship with one another. Now I want you to look at your list if you wrote it down and see what books and letters these come from. And I would ask you to consider, who do you think all of these commands are given to? Of course, we are to love the global church, and we all and should. I've got a piece of paper on this lectern that reminds me of the over 3,000 Christians around the world that were killed for their faith just in the last year, because I don't want to forget the global church, and we shouldn't either. But these commands, who are they given to? They're given directly to churches or to Christians who would eventually be a part of a local church because it hadn't yet been established yet. I want you to think about your ability to carry deep relationships like a parking lot. Now, my lot may be able to hold 4 cars, and you can squeeze 6 into yours, but we all have limited abilities. We have a limited capacity. So who are we primarily called to live life among? And as we look at these over 50 references of the one another's, we realize that it's going to take time, it's going to take effort, and it's going to take legitimate resources. And who are we primarily commanded to live these one another's out with? Well, I would propose that if these commands were given to local churches, then it would be true to see them as commands to local churches now. Because what makes up a healthy global church? A bunch of little local churches. If we're going to invest in the body, the global church, it means that wherever we're living, we're investing to one another's primarily in the local body that we've been a part of. So yes, we should all be kind and loving toward all people, especially fellow believers. And this type of thorough intention, though, and we know this, can only be extended to so many people. And so, our targeted efforts of discipleship should primarily be among fellow church members. Now, that might rub some the wrong way, and that's fine. I would encourage you to think deeply about the text that I've given you and the context in which they've been given, and how the scriptures are assuming that we are a part of local bodies and investing our best there. And while we have limited capacity, we are still called to care for the entire church membership. If you're a member here, there are about 200 members, and you are called to care for each of them. How can you do that? Based on what I just told you, we have limited parking lots. So how are you going to care for 200 souls in a way when you only have space for 4? Well, that's a great question. You can pray and you can give. Every members meeting, you receive a membership directory, and there is a prayer calendar on there. And I hope that we are making it a habit to have this thing, to pray through it, and to even let people know, hey, I'm praying for you this week. No agenda. You just come up. It's Tuesday. I'm praying for the C's. I'm praying for you today. We're all capable of praying, and I hope that we'll do that. Also, you can give. Now, how does our giving play a role in you caring for the rest of the membership? That's probably a good question. If you're asking it, I hope that you would. Because when I give, I've been thinking more about this morning even. We are providing resources and opportunities and care for one another of this church in ways that may surprise us. And I want to tell you about a story this week where I saw that to be true. On Thursday, the staff and I went to some training, some counseling training that you paid for, by the way. And it is sharpening our ability to help marriages process things like communication, conflict resolution. How do you prepare for marriage well? How do you stay married in healthy ways? You paid for that. I left the training a little bit early so that I could be back in town to meet with a couple that we've been talking and processing some things in marriage. And immediately on the heels of this training, I was able to take some things that I had learned, infuse it into our conversation, and it really set the trend and the trajectory of where the following meetings are going to go. Do you know where that came from? Because you gave, you blessed a family that you don't even know about it. I'm saying that because I want us to know, like when we check a box online, when we drop it in the box in the back, often it's easy for us to feel transactional. But pray that your giving is relational and that you're really making a difference in the lives of people here in Martinsburg and all around the world when you make a sacrifice and you place it in the box. This is our responsibility, and this is a way for us to invest in the lives of fellow members. The next responsibility is quite clear. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17. This is what it says. Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that would be of no advantage to you. This means that members are to submit to their elders. God has placed authority over all of us in every area of our lives. Family, civil, work, spiritual. Our pastors, my pastors, are my spiritual authority. And the Bible calls us, all of us, to submit to that authority over our lives. Now, I've had several conversations with people, and I've learned that this position of spiritual authority has been abused, and it continues to be. And brothers and sisters, I deeply grieve that. But I can only speak to our pastors here, which I've done extensively last Sunday from this pulpit. I can tell you, with a clean conscience and a happy heart, that our 5 pastors here want to honor the work that Jesus has done, and that means that we shepherd the flock of God before the sight of God. And this is what influences our shepherding more than anything else. And that gives us great pause to ensure that we're staying faithful to the Scriptures and to God's calling on our lives. And as we all submit to our elders, we are ultimately submitting to Jesus. He is the shepherd and overseer of our souls, and he does it through his under-shepherds who serve as an extension of his care for his people. And me, Pastor Jamie, Pastor Terry, Pastor Pat, Pastor Will, according to Hebrews 13:17, it says, we will give an account. This is the scariest passage in the whole Bible for me. And we don't take it lightly. And as we talk about this, I hope it's obvious, it's important to realize that we're not commanded to follow our pastors blindly, though, or any other pastor. Notice that I've said we submit to our pastors. So somebody rolls up at your workplace and you're like, hey, I'm a pastor. Doesn't mean you submit to them because they're a self-professed pastor. The pastoral authority in your life is the ones that God has placed over you in the body that you've submitted to. We don't follow our pastors blindly either, though. So long as our pastors are teaching the Scriptures and leading the church biblically, church members are called to submit to the wisdom, counsel, and instruction the Lord has gifted and charged us with. This is the responsibility of the member to submit to their elders. And lastly, church members have the distinct and honored responsibility to evangelize the lost. It's a freaky word for us, though, evangelize. It comes from a word in the Greek which means bring good news, which should be less intimidating. It is our role as members, not just the pastors or the community group leaders or the ministry team leaders. It is every role of every member to take the gospel to all of those, from our neighbors to the nations. It means, brother, when I reach out to you and I say, hey, we want to pray for your neighboring this week, how's it going, that you've got an answer. And maybe it's just, I'm just getting to know their name. Praise God. We're going to pray to that end. We should all take a radical ownership of the purpose of God in our life, that he has called us to make him known, whether it's places of rest, work, and play, because he wants us to see those areas as the mission field and nothing other than that. We have a higher purpose that is bigger than all of us, and that's what I want to call networking. Jesus told Peter, one of the disciples who was a fisherman, that if he would follow him, he would call him to a different type of fishing. You know what I'm talking about? He promised Peter that if you'd follow me, then I'm going to make you a fisher of men. It's the kind of networking that would bring far more joy than the catch that Peter almost saw his ship being sunken with. And Jesus has called us to the same work. So I'm wondering, beloved, do you go to work for a paycheck, or do you serve for God's purposes first? Do you show up on the team to perform better, or do you embrace a higher purpose? This is our marching orders. Matthew chapter 28 is known as the Great Commission, and it's the command to every believer. Jesus says, all authority, all means all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you, and behold, the great promise that he is with us always, even to the end of the age. This tells us we got a role to play. Now, this may not be the most sexy, motivating sermon you've ever heard, but it's maybe one of the more important ones you've ever heard, because this is calling us to clarity on what does it mean to be a part of a local body. We got roles to play. What do you see if these responsibilities are held up before you as a mirror against your own life? You see, it's important In your loop, there's a copy of the covenant. If you're a member, you've seen this. We read it at every members meeting. What if you looked at that over lunch and you allowed this to serve as a mirror against your own life? It's not a pass or fail. It's an assessment tool. If you're a church member here or somewhere else, and you look at the responsibilities of church member according to the scriptures, and you look in the mirror, what do you see? What do you see? It's not pass or fail, but I'm wondering, is gathering with God's people a priority? How well do you know your fellow church members? How well do you know when you see the person across the hallway, you may not know them, but you at least know who they are because you've seen their face in the membership directory. Can you explain the gospel? How can we protect something that we can't explain? Have you encouraged a fellow member this week in spiritual matters or just walking in life? Or how about this, when we're thinking about submitting to the elders, when you think of your elders, when I think of my elders, what is my gut reaction to their face in my mind? Who was the last unbelieving person you had a spiritual conversation with? These questions are intended to just draw out our heart as we're thinking about the roles and responsibilities that God has given us. Because if the church is going to be the church, it's all hands on deck. There are no members on the sidelines. Because God saves, He sustains, and He sends ordinary people through the local church to delight in and declare His glory across the world. That is the point of the local church. So we gather today as an assembly of heaven, but one day we will no longer be on foreign soil. May we live in light of that.